when it comes to Yennefer, even I have mixed feelings about her. So I can only imagine how the other characters have also got mixed feelings about her, because she's the morally gray character in here. We've got a lot of morally gray characters in here, but she's definitely one of them, because she swings back and forth between doing the right thing and then doing something that's completely self-serving, right? And she nearly destroys the world based on her own personal anger and anguish and need for vengeance, right? And as a result, she loses her powers. And so I thought that was very poetic, because it's like, you were warned the entire way that this could destroy you ultimately if you continue to pursue this path, and now you've lost it.
Welcome to The Story Thinker, a Webtoons and Witcher podcast for superfans with scene-by-scene analysis. Featuring sharp co-hosts for a fuller picture, we dive deep into character psychology, relationships, and theories. We'd love it if you could like, subscribe, comment, and rate us on all podcast platforms and social media. For bonus content, you can support The Story Thinker on Patreon. Let's begin. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of The Witcher podcast. Episode 6 is called Dear Friend, and today I am very excited to have Patty, who is a super regular guest on the podcast, mainly for Midnight Poppyland. And I'm going to plug Patty because she has so many cool things that she does. Patty, besides for obviously all the podcasts, Patty does fanfic. She does analyses. She does like other book recommendations, which are actually pretty interesting. You have a certain genre of book that you like. You always have these artfully arranged pictures. So check out Patty's Instagram, and I'll link her, fanfic. It's not Witcher fanfic, but still, it's really good. So there we are.
All right. Well, maybe someday I'll get into Witcher fanfic. Who knows? Sounds like it's pretty prolific out there too. So hi everyone, I'm Patty. And it was so funny when you were talking about doing this podcast. I was like, oh my God, yes, I want to do it, because I love The Witcher. My first love in any kind of like reading is always fantasy. Fantasy was my first love. It's my diehard, and like, because I told you guys that I'm very recent to romance, right? But fantasy is my jam, right? What's really interesting is that I didn't know anything about The Witcher until the TV series came out. So, because I was never a gamer. Sorry, guys. So like I didn't play any of the video games. While I own the first book, The Last Wish, I don't own all of the books yet, and I haven't read them. So all of my insights are completely based on the show right now. However, I do plan to read the series, but I'm a little bit of a book snob about it because I require my books to be hardback, and right now in the States, you can only get them in paperback, and it drives me crazy.
I also didn't know you were such a snob like that.
I am, and that's not to say that I don't own paperbacks. Like I have some where I will just read them and then I donate them, but in terms of like things that I want to keep in my collection, I'm very specific, and I've also acquired a very awful addiction to special edition books, as you can see on my Instagram. But no, I'm very excited to talk about The Witcher. This is one of my favorite shows. It kind of hits all the points for me. So really excited to talk about this episode too. There's a lot going on.
Yes, and Patty, I have to say, is a whiz at psychological analysis. You work in the mental health field, and it shows because you're really good at that. So I'm very excited to hear. So let's get into it. And just a reminder, we're, to the audience, we're grouping it by storyline, so it's less confusing. So, storyline by storyline.
Yes.
So we're starting out with Vesemir interests. So basically what happened now is, in the last episode, is Geralt apprehended Vesemir trying to inject Ciri, the wisdom of which was very questionable. And now he kind of wakes up and he's like, I've been a fool. And, he's talking to Triss, and he figures they must have gone to Nennica. And then, here's where a lot of people are like, something doesn't make sense, but let's make some assumptions here. He basically Triss says, oh, her blood, what we made is more dangerous than we know. And then after that, which timing is a little weird, but after that, 𝘴𝘵𝘪 clutches his medallion, he sends his magic, and we have Rience come in. He is the fire fucker, as so eloquently described. Comes in, battles, surrounds Triss with fire. 𝘴𝘵𝘪 like breaks a broom, fights him. They have this whole thing. They're overpowered, and Rience disappears. So, but a lot of people have said, the timing is weird. Like, how did Rience know what was going on? How did Rience know that this vial? Because later we see that. But theoretically, if he was waiting in the shadows, he could have heard, Triss say, okay, this blood is powerful, blah, blah, blah. Yes, the medallion did start ringing afterwards, but.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where maybe the books later on might clear it up, assuming that this is not just completely made up in the story, right? But yeah, like I will say, as someone who hasn't read the books and is just purely looking at this from the show standpoint, that does look a little suspicious, and I wonder if we won't get like a flashback or something that indicates how he discovered where she was. Or that this vial of her blood was something that they were even looking at. But what I find was interesting about that scene, outside of our firefucker that decided to ruin everything, I loved the conversation between Triss and 𝘴𝘵𝘪, because it really looked at, like, they really had, like, Triss was she was reluctant for him to do this to Ciri, but you could tell that, like, 𝘴𝘵𝘪 was looking for some sort of hope, right? They hadn't created a new Witcher in eons, right? And this was the first time that they found somebody who, like, she's fighting, she wants this, right? Ciri wants this. She may not understand why she wants it, and I think she's a little on the naive side in terms of what it entails, right? Which is why Geralt is like, no, you don't need to be doing this. But I think, in that moment where 𝘴𝘵𝘪 saw Geralt, like, what the hell are you doing? And stopping him from doing this, and stopping to have that conversation with Ciri in the last episode, he really starts to understand that there's a bigger dynamic at play here, and that they need to not be so impulsive, right? But this conversation between him and Triss, like, I thought it was very endearing. Like, I still haven't quite figured out what their relationship is. They seem like a father-daughter kind of dynamic, but I don't know how they know each other just yet. And maybe I missed that, but
yeah, when she arrives at Triss, when Triss arrives at Kaer Mohren, they mentioned that after she healed Geralt, 𝘴𝘵𝘪 was so grateful that he invited her to Kaer Mohren, and it seems that's where the relationship started.
Yeah. So yeah, she's definitely been kind of like a staple there, and I loved that, like, when she swept in, like, if you notice, and I know I'm getting a little off track here, but if you noticed, like, when she first visited the Witcher lair, as I like to call it, like, it was before she did that, it was very cold, it was very, cool tones and things like that, and then she sweeps in, and, like, all the warmth that just kind of sweeps into the cinematics, and you could just tell, like, her visits are the kind of thing that kind of breathes life into the Witcher den, right? But I find it very endearing that while both of them thought that, okay, we'll do this because this is what she wants, they didn't stop to think, like, does she know that what she's really getting herself into?
Yeah, I thought it was totally irresponsible on so many levels. I mean, we discussed the last episode. She's too unknowing to really agree. B, like, if you kill off the source of elder blood, like, it's risky enough for a regular.
Sure.
And this is apparently your only source of making elder blood, and you're potentially killing her off. It's at least try it on, like, I don't know, an animal first. Like,
right.
Well,
and they don't even know, like, it's you're so right. It's such an experiment, because they don't know, like, what if you do this Witcher thing, this Witcher experiment with elder blood? Like, we don't even know what that ends up being. And
one of they get the, I mean, you know, we learned, first of all, in the anime Nightmare of the Wolf, right, that the mages are the ones who had the knowledge and they were killed. So like, who has the recipe? And like, all Triss had to do was like do some, you know, incantation, but how did she know that?
Right, right. Well, and if you think about it, Ciri really has like a triad of powers here, because we know that she contains chaos. We know that now she has elder blood on top of that. So she not only has these magical abilities, she has elder blood. And then on top of that, can you imagine taking those two very volatile things and creating a witcher? Because one of the things that we have seen about the process of becoming a witcher and what it does to a person emotionally is it deadens their emotional their ability to feel things, right? Because they have to go through.
Do you think that's true? I thought it was like a thing that they made up to, like, I don't know, make themselves feel better, make people fear them or whatever.
I think, I mean, ultimately, I think some of it is true, but I also think that they play a huge role in that, because they don't, I mean, if you think about it, they go through and they do this job over and over and over again. And you kind of have to steel yourself when you do that kind of work, because people die along the way, even despite your best efforts. And you can't let emotions get in the way when you're in the middle of a battle, for sure. But what we've seen is that it's not entirely true, because Ciri has been slowly creeping into Geralt's heart, very slowly but surely. And you can tell there's like little moments and little glimmers. And we saw it last season with Yennefer, right? But can you imagine like someone who wants to, like, if we're coming from my psychological perspective, someone who's in a lot of emotional pain like Ciri, right? She's lost her entire family. She's lost her kingdom. She's basically an orphan on the run with this person who has essentially adopted her, that she's grown close to. But ultimately, she has a lot that is unresolved. And one of the major things that happens with chaos that we saw with Yennefer last season is that when your emotions are out of control, it's very destructive, right? And so she sees becoming a witcher as this thing that will help me contain what I am, help me contain and hone and become this weapon that I can control, right? She believes that it's a form of control, or at least that's how I see it. But I mean, when you look at it from the big picture, can you imagine someone who has the mage powers plus the elder blood, and then they become a witcher that is supposedly unfeeling, an even bigger weapon? It's like the triad of weapons.
Right. And yeah, who knows what it'll do to her.
Right.
It's making their decision even worse.
Yeah. And I think, like, to me, when I watch The Witcher, one of the overarching themes is, how do I maintain my humanity with the powers that I have? There's so much inhumane things happening in this world that this is kind of the way to, like, we have to pull ourselves back in, you know, and how do I maintain my humanity in spite of such awful things?
Yeah.
That was just my kind of take on that moment, and that moment where, you know, kind of circling back around to the original point of Vesemir and Triss having that conversation. That was that very real human moment of, like, we almost really fucked up.
Yeah, I know, and we are criticizing the decision, but it was definitely born of desperation, for sure, on Vesemir's part.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
it was impulsive, and
things.
You know, I mean, you want to talk about a man who probably hasn't had hope in forever, right? Decades. So I mean, I get the temptation of it. She could be very powerful. She already is very powerful, but you know, you're right. It's a very impulsive decision.
Yeah. So one thing that I also liked about the scene was that as soon as, you know, all this happens, Triss yells, she's like, Lambert! And it's just funny because apparently, and it's apparently played up much more in the books, there's a pretty antagonistic relationship between her and Lambert. They're always like ribbing at each other. And
oh, that's great.
But like when push comes to shove, when she's like, needs help, she just like calls for Lambert. She didn't call for any of the other Witchers. She calls for him. So again, I don't know the books. I don't know if there's supposed to be a romance eventually between them, or if it's just like friendship, or I don't know.
Yeah,
but I just noticed that.
And I've heard inklings about, people got really up in arms the first season because of the whole like hyped up relationship between Yennefer and Geralt, and people are really saying like Triss is his true love, and I'm like, we've just been introduced to her, and clearly there's history there, right? But it's I think it's one of those things where Geralt, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, he's really moved beyond his a little bit with his romantic relationships. He's a dad now.
Yes. All right, so moving on, basically, eventually he's stable, and then they discuss, what, they make fun of her, like, oh, you're kind, and then she realizes that that he took the bottle,
the vial, yeah,
and then we shift to seeing Rience with the bottle, right? It's a very nice transition. She realizes she's like, oh fuck, and then we see him with it,
yeah,
and he's talking to Lydia, and he wants to meet her boss. And I have to say, kudos to Rience. He is so spooky and creepy and
oh my god,
eerie.
skin crawling wait, oh,
he kind of reminds me of the 𝘕𝘪𝘵𝘥𝘪, because both of them seemed like, well, the 𝘕𝘪𝘵 much more so, but he doesn't seem to have like his own personal humanity. Like he's just this like pure, I don't know, mercenary evil. Like he doesn't seem to have any morals or like personal goals. He's just like, I don't know. He does have some personality. Like the 𝘕𝘪𝘵 seem to be like much more, I don't know, impersonal and like psychotic. But yeah, he seems properly evil.
yeah, and I think we got to have a true villain in here, right? And and we have multiple villains in this world, right? But he is the big bad this season. And so I do, even though, don't get me wrong, I love my morally gray characters and all of that, but sometimes you just need a true blue demon. Sometimes you just need somebody that you love to hate. and he is the epitome of that. Oh my gosh. Like he is purely driven by his own desires. Like he is pure incarnate evil. So
yeah, and what happens now? Wait, does it happen now, or does it happen in the next one? Never mind. Yeah, it's in the next scene. It's in the next episode. Sorry. Okay. Well, it was another thing showing his evilness. But another character that also intrigues me, I'm not sure. I suspect she's also pretty evil. Is Lydia. She plays her character really well, of like this nonchalant, uncaring, also just like very pretending everything is very frivolous.
Right.
Yeah. So basically, she tells him, you need some help. You didn't do what you were supposed to do, and I have these savage brothers who can help you get, apprehend her in the temple. And so that's going to be coming up. And back to Vesemir and Triss, we have Triss tells Vesemir that it's gone and she has to go. She runs away, and she is. We now see Tissaia in Aretuza smoking a pipe. She's looking at the Yen posters, right, the wanted ads. Yeah. Because Yen basically betrayed her massively. So
yes.
And I have a feeling she's conflicted. Like she doesn't know what to think, because she really liked Yen, but now she's like, I don't know if she necessarily thinks Yen is working for Nilfgaard, or Yen is just this unreliable, selfish, narcissistic person who is just completely independent, only loyal to herself, basically. I don't know. What do you think Tissaia's feelings are on Yen?
The problem is, like, when it comes to Yennefer, even I have mixed feelings about her. So I can only imagine how the other characters have also got mixed feelings about her, because she's the morally gray character in here. We've got a lot of morally gray characters in here, but she's definitely one of them, because she swings back and forth between doing the right thing and then doing something that's completely self-serving, right? And she nearly destroys the world based on her own personal anger and anguish and need for vengeance, right? And as a result, she loses her powers. And so I thought that was very poetic, because it's like, you were warned the entire way that this could destroy you ultimately if you continue to pursue this path, and now you've lost it.
That's one of the first things 𝘴𝘰𝘬 told her, right? When she tried to, kill herself back when she was a student, when she first came to Aretuza, she was like, oh, at least I would have had control. And 𝘴𝘰𝘬 was like, you didn't have control, you lost control. Yeah. She's always been very, very passionate.
Yes. And I get it. I mean, from a psychological standpoint, when you're abused in that way for so long, it makes sense that, she doesn't have control of her chaos, right? It's her emotions rule her, right? She goes from very, very endearing to, in a split second betrays the people who are closest to her, simply because she's in pursuit of her own, like, she wants her own destiny, right? She's always wanted to break free of the convention. Her big theme, I think, and what her character arc is going to represent is freedom, not only from her past, but from herself. She is not free in any stretch of the imagination, because even though she bounces from place to place and does whatever she wants, she's not emotionally free. And so I would really like to see that about her. And of course, we'll find out a little bit later in the episode that, of course, she has another one of those kind of impulsive drives, and kind of has nefarious intentions here in this episode. Long story short, like, long story short, I don't blame people for like second guessing her and not really knowing if they could trust her.
Yeah, and it's definitely setting up. I mean, the last scene kind of sets up a potential antagonistic relationship between 𝘴𝘰𝘬 and Jan. So yeah, so anyway, 𝘴𝘰𝘬 is, looking at this poster, and then Triss comes in, and she's kind of like panicking. She's like, I am loyal to you, and which I thought was an interesting line.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I'm loyal to you. Like, her loyalty was not in question, as far as I know.
Right.
And she's like, she tells a drop of her blood can change the world, and in the wrong hands, she will destroy it.
Right.
So I will say I was a little disappointed in Triss's behavior last time, when she really freaked out after that 𝘸𝘪𝘵𝘪𝘏, and she comes here, like, Ciri is a teenage girl. She's clearly someone who wants to do the right thing, and she needs support at the time, and you're the adult. Like, I feel like after this really scary dream, you should have been there for her and say, okay, we're going to help you figure this out. We're going to, have this crazy power, but like, we're going to work through this. And she just like leaves her. Okay, fine, Geralt took her, but like, her reaction was it was panicked, yes. But like, I feel like I would have expected Triss to contain her panic and comfort Ciri.
Yeah, because she was kind of the steady voice of reason throughout the last couple of episodes, and I'm like, I think maybe, from a narrative standpoint, I think maybe that's the story trying to tell us that, Triss has her flaws. She may be a very knowledgeable mage. She may be, kind of that steady voice of reason, but even the people who have steady voices of reason have their moments, and I think this is something that the world has never seen before, and it scares the crap out of Triss. This is so beyond what anything she's ever seen before, and they don't know what to do with it. So you have all of these adults, right? And this is the trope that I love from my teenage years. You have all of these adults who have no idea what the fuck is going on and what to do. But this teenager is either going to destroy the world or save the world.
that is, by the way, every young adult fantasy novel. Teenagers saving the world. I'm currently reading one of those myself.
They're so good. They're so good.
Right, it's like the people with the least life experience and the most volatility. We rely on them to save the world.
Right. And yet, I will say, I know that it's a narrative trope, but I will say that I have worked with some like later aged adolescents, like 16, 17, and 18, that they honestly surprise me in their maturity. That they may be, because obviously I'm a therapist, so, working with some of them, they're obviously going through their own struggles. But what's interesting to find is that these teenagers that are struggling, it's actually because of the adults in their life a lot of the time. And I'm like, Interesting, because they usually have to grow up pretty fast.
Mhm.
So could I see it actually becoming a thing where a teenager saves the world? I don't know. Maybe, and maybe that's why we fantasize about it. But
Yeah, well, I have more thoughts on that, but we should probably go back to the episode
oh
instead
yeah,
of
for
going
sure.
into that discussion. So now let's talk about Istredd. So Istredd
Mhm.
is curious, so he wants to do some research, and I love this whole scene. It's really nice. He
Oh,
goes
I
to this
know.
called,
It's
it
so good.
reminds me a lot of Harry Potter, right? I don't know if it struck that vibe to you, but it did
It,
to me.
it did. It did.
Yeah, yeah. So he
Um,
goes to this place called Codringher and Fenn, and you know, there's this old man there surrounded by a billion books, and he's like, you know, they banter back and forth. You know, you want knowledge. Knowledge is expensive, and Istred's like, he's so funny. He's like such a typical, you know, nerd, and he's like,
oh
oh, I
yeah.
didn't know you had this book. I didn't know this book still existed. You know, he's so cute.
Oh, I know. I loved that as a book nerd and as a knowledge nerd myself. I think this was definitely the comic relief that we needed in the moment, because so much of the episode was like, bam, we're going to hit you with all the bad stuff. And this was the kind of the levity that we needed.
Mm-hmm.
I love the scene where he's like, yeah, you ought to be careful about touching those things. You know, it might take your hand off. I got a kick out of that. And so
The
I was like,
characters were great. So yeah, so we see him there. He wants information, and then we see his wife, I guess.
yes,
And you know, first he thinks it's the cat, but no.
yeah,
And you know, they find out, and I have to say, by the way, I know a lot of people are like, it's always a big issue with like, oh, representation, blah, blah, blah. I think it's fantastic that they put a differently abled person there. I think it's great, and I think it's super important. So I am,
yeah, I love it.
happy
I
with
love
that.
it. I actually loved the banter back and forth between these two, and they're like, yes, knowledge is very expensive.
They look like they make such a good couple, right? Like they just
I
probably poke each other all day long.
yes. Oh God, the banter was so good. I mean, you know, I'm a sucker for banter. Um, but I love how they just kind of tease them, and they're kind of like, um, it kind of had like a Lord of the Rings feel too, where it's just like, oh, you want knowledge that's going to cost you.
It was
I
great.
loved it so much, so much. And they find out a lot about what's going on a little bit later in the episode.
Yeah, so right. So basically he tells them there's a mysterious girl power
Mhm.
monolith, and he wants to find out information. And one of the funny lines is like, how could we get answers faster? More sarcasm.
More sarcasm. Yes. Oh my God. I died at that moment. Like, because they're just going at it. And dude over here, he's just like, wait, can we get back to the point?
Yeah. So basically what they find out, and sometimes it felt like it was a little bit confusing, I'll be honest, but
Yeah.
basically they deduce that there must be a gene in the Cintran blood. They call it
Right.
𝘬𝘱, 𝘬𝘪𝘵, 𝘬𝘱, 𝘬𝑪, 𝘬𝑅, and they realize that the elves built a weapon or warrior to be against humans called 𝘬𝘪𝘵𝘪𝘗. And then there's this prophecy that they read: a baby will born and shall die, and my curse will hound until the 10th generation, till columns of space and time tremble and open for my people. So that's the curse.
Whew. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to tell you what I think about that prophecy. I just know that like it's very doom and gloom, and she has come forth to end all things. And like, remember what we were talking about earlier about, you know, can you imagine someone with this kind of power? We don't even know what kind of powers she can have because of the elder blood, right? It's so far beyond. I mean, I've gone a little bit into episode 7, of course, but it's man, we don't even know where this is going to bring us.
Yeah, I know for me that the first thing I always think about is like, okay, so if Ciri is, let's say, 10th generation, whatever, and she's the curse, like, how does a curse happen? Again, okay, this is within the Witcher framework, but like, I always think that a person's choice, you know, a person either can choose to bring it about. Like Ciri is obviously a good person, and she doesn't want to kill all of humanity or elves either. So like, how would that happen? Something using her power without her choice. Oh.
Right. And so I'm wondering if there's something about it, you know, because again, like you bring up a great point with choice. I wonder if there is someone who's supposed to be like the guardian of her power, or or if there's something where, like, I don't know how to explain this, but like when all of the keys are in place and then the mechanism starts to like come together, like, is there something that just takes over who Ciri is? Because I've seen that before, where like sometimes the powers like obliterate the person within. Because we know, like you said, Ciri doesn't want any of this destruction. She wants to help people. She just wants to do something good in the world, because so much of, and I think she felt helpless in a lot of ways too, in the previous season, and she's trying to find a way not to be helpless. So she's kind of searching for her own freedom as well, just like Yennefer is. I do wonder, based on what happens, I keep saying this, later on in the episode with Yennefer, I do have to wonder if she plays a role in that.
Okay. Yeah.
Because Yennefer doesn't have the best of intentions.
Well, okay, so let's just discuss it when we get to it, because yes, I have what to say. But before we get to Ian and Ciri, let's talk about Fringilla and Francesca and Cahir and what's going on in Cintra. So basically, we have Cintra is looking beautiful again. It's not like destroyed anymore, or at least what we see. So we have Fringilla and Francesca are strolling along this beautiful lake. People are walking around. It looks really nice and peaceful. And, it's like the refuge for the elves at last. And Francesca is reviving the roses as she's walking along. And she tells Fringilla that she used to go flower picking with her mother, and then her mother died, and she would revive the flowers. And then when her father caught her, he tried to lead the village in a crusade against her. But luckily, the village was not into that. And her brother Gage held her father down while she stabbed him in his throat. And the village built a statue in her honor. Drama.
Yeah, talk about that. Well, and it sounds like, and forgive me because it's not the same as reading, but when I watch this, I'm thinking, like, is there something in her past, like her father didn't know that she was an elf or had these powers?
I think he obviously he knew she was an elf, but he didn't know she was a mage. Not all elves have magic.
Okay. I was like, why would you do that against your kid? But and this just goes to show you that no matter what being they are, mages are seen as these, like, oh my god, get away from me kind of things. Like, people are just afraid of them.
So I don't know if mages in general have that reputation, but I don't know, maybe if within elf society and mages, because in human society mages are like leaders basically. I don't know if maybe in elven society is different, or if he's just an intolerant jerk, like if it was her father, because the village was excited, right? The village built a statue in her honor, and she became the leader of her people. So it could be just that her father was a particularly open-minded, narrow-minded person.
I feel like there's more to that story, and I'm wondering, what that'll look like. But I find it really interesting, like, as they're having Fringilla and her having this conversation, she's like sitting there bringing these flowers back to life. And it's such a contrast, because like she's been having difficulty conceiving, right? And bringing a child to full term, and she's able to bring all of these other things to life, but she can't bring her own children to life. And like, talk about devastating, and just, that this is, but I love the relationship that she has with Fringilla, because here are these two women who, are in relative positions of power now, but have largely been secondary to other people, and have together they've actually become, the leader of this new world with elves, and I love that, because so many, and this is just a gripe of mine, like so many other shows and books and things, they pit women against each other, right? It becomes this like tit for tat, we're going to compete kind of thing. But I love that wasn't done here, and I love that they actually come to their own freedom and their power together. So I love their relationship, and I hope that it doesn't get. There's some foreshadowing later in the episode, and I'm really hoping that it doesn't turn sour.
I'm not too hopeful on that front, but
I know.
We'll see. But yeah, I love it too, and especially to see Fringilla, because Fringilla was so unrelatable last season. She was so frigid
Oh,
and
yeah.
so emotionless, and she's really showing a lot of vulnerability and humanity in this season. She does it so well. I thought she did it. She seems to me like the kind of person who is very distrustful, and that's why she hid her emotions away. And that's why she put on a very blank slate kind of front, because she couldn't trust anybody. And now she's like loosening. It's great.
Yeah. And she's able to kind of see the fruits of her labor. Like even the end of this conversation that they're having, she's like, because Fringilla is still very deferential to her boss, right? And you know, she says to her, you know, it's not him that my people see, you know, welcoming them and feeding them and nurturing them. It's you, and that means something, you know. And I think that that's huge for Fringilla, you know, when she's been kept in this. I mean, let's be real, the mages are kept in captivity as this like sword to wield for these leaders and these kings. And you know, this is the first time I think Fringilla has seen the possibility of being a leader in her own right.
Yes, and it's definitely a big part of her story. This whole season is like coming into her own power and believing in herself.
Sure.
And something that's interesting, what Francesca says to her, she's like, you know, they talk about how Aretuza taught them about politics and persuasion to make the kings think that they're in the monarchy think that they're in control, and really you're pulling the strings. And Francesca says, like, with Cahir, you're different when he's around, smaller. And I have to say, like, I love Cahir. He's probably my favorite character, besides for maybe Jaskier. They're both really up there. I love Cahir from all my twisted, you know, tormented soul reasons. But anyway, different discussion. But Cahir is a lot of, he's not a bit of a jerk, he's a lot of a jerk. And it's interesting. One thing that I noticed with people like that, so Cahir is very confident, right? And he just like takes control and, you know, very authoritative and says what he wants to do. And I think you know, he's going to have a conversation with Fringilla, which does show he's considerate. But a lot of times when people are very strong-minded personalities, they sometimes unintentionally overrun people with less loud personalities. And I know that both my husband and I are very, very loud. And I know I have to stop myself sometimes to be like, okay, let other people talk. Let other people, you know, put in input into their decision. Like, don't just like take charge and say, okay, let's do like this right away. Like, I'm bossy. So, you know, and that's definitely what's happening. Fringilla is more timid for whatever reason. You know, she was very in control last season and very like, oh, we would do this. But compared to Cahir, she's definitely not as forceful. So, and I think Cahir probably doesn't even notice how much he's being like, you know, overriding.
You're probably right about that. I'll admit I did not get a chance to watch season 1 again before I watched this, so I guess my reaction to him is a little bit more cold. But I can also see your point of like, he probably doesn't realize he's doing these things, and like, he's a one-track mind. He's got their mission at hand, and you know, Fringilla has been, you know, even though she's been sidetracked, you know, this has been a really important sidetrack for her in both development of her character and, you know, her own emotional needs, because she's had to like put them at bay for so long. But yeah, I think you're right. Their dynamic is definitely one of like, here is much more like he's the dom. I mean, if you want to look at it in terms of how they're presented, he's the white man. He's the white man and she's the black woman, you know, and while those politics don't really play, I don't know that they really play in The Witcher, but it's a way to communicate to us that, you know, this is a power shift dynamic. And I don't know, I'm not as inclined to be as nice about Cahir, and maybe it's because of my own biases, but I am team Fringilla.
No, I irrationally totally fell in love with Cahir. So I know my heart is over my brain right now, and
it's okay. It's okay.
So, but I will, in defense of Cahir, the conversation they have next does show he's not a complete asshole. He's only sometimes
true.
He tells her, he says, you know, yes, the way the elves are treated is despicable, and I'm happy, which is so funny to me, because like it's the one sympathetic thing he says like in his life. But anyway,
right.
Says, you know,
I don't know that he knows how to be sympathetic.
And he's like, I'm happy that we could provide them, you know, with a safe space here, but like, don't forget, I know you didn't forget your mission, you just got distracted. So the way he phrases it, a real jerk who has no empathy would say like, Fringilla, you're forgetting, you know, about our mission. What's wrong with you? And he doesn't do that. He says, you know, I'm happy we could provide something for the elves, and I know that you didn't forget. Right. Like, we just have to remind you, like, let's focus on our mission. So I'm happy. That's my defense of Cahir.
I'm struggling with his character a little bit, and maybe it's just because I'm like, he's always the one who comes in and just and you know, he's always the one who comes in and just kind of bulldozes the hopes and dreams and is like, all right, that we got to refocus, we got to do, hey, don't forget your mission and all this. And I'm just like, dude, can we be happy for like 5 seconds? Like, it's hilarious because usually I'm the cynical person that like comes in and I'm like, all right, guys, we got to think about this realistically. So it's good for me to kind of see how that feels and how that looks on the other end, you know?
Okay, so I will say, season 1, he was portrayed as like psycho, right? He just like, you know, killed everybody, and you know, with the Doppler, and he killed all those random people in the inn instead of just testing him with silver. So psycho Cahir, right? And then season 2, we see him vulnerable. We see him like a little bit of, you know, a lot bit of a fanatic in the jail. And then what really turned me around on him was the interaction he had with Yen and their experience running away together, and especially my favorite scene of all time, where he, you know, comforts Yen. She's like, oh, I lost everything, blah, blah. And he's like, you were amazing at Sodden, and, you know, we all have our time in the sun. So I'm actually curious, because I was like, when they were, you know, when he like grabbed her and he's like, you were amazing at Sodden, I was like, oh, are they romantic? What did you think of that?
You know, here's the thing, when you're in close quarters like that, when you're in the I've almost died kind of thing, you know, I think it's easy to fall into that romantic kind of like we almost just died kind of thing, where you get that immediate attraction. I don't know if that's something that's going to play out later on. Maybe it will, but it seems like there's so many characters that are in love with Yennefer, and I'm like, guys, she's like the toxic person that you really shouldn't be with.
Well, Cahir's pretty toxic too. That's why I think they're, you know, like Geralt is too good for her, honestly, right? But Cahir, like, they have a lot of nasty sides to them. I think they could do quite well together.
And that's the thing. Like some people do this thing called trauma bonding, where they, you know, they both have similar baggage. And so they're like, oh my God, we can connect and we understand each other, and they fall hard and they fall fast, right? And it's this very roller coaster relationship. And I think Yennefer had that with Geralt because they both had baggage, and now you got Cahir with Yennefer, like they've got that little spark, and I'm like, oh my God, like I want someone to, like, don't get me wrong, I love Yennefer. And I want someone to walk in and not be completely enthralled with her. I want someone to be like, the hell is your deal? Like,
call her. Jaskier says that all the time. So he calls her an evil witch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even he's kind of enamored with her in a kind of, they have like a brotherly and sisterly banter, which I love. I love, but you know, I think part of what Yennefer's going to have to do, and I know I'm getting off topic, but I think part of what Yennefer's going to have to do to earn her freedom is eat some humble pie.
Well, she did this season, but then she went right back to. Well, she did some nice things this season, which you know, she tried to save little elf children and whatever. But anyway, let's get back to what happened here. So Dara, by the way, passes by. You know, Cahir tells her, you know, the girl was last seen in Sodden, right? And then at that moment, Dara happens to be passing by, so he can relay this information to, you know, Redania.
How convenient.
Right. And then we see Francesca talking to Filavandrel, and she's like, you know, preparing the crib for the baby, and, you know, how's training? Our people know how to kill? And she's like, no, our people know how to defend themselves, right? So Francesca feels like the elves have always been the victims, which apparently in the books, it's really not so much that way. Like everyone's a bad guy in the books. Like all the races of creatures are like all equally fighting each other. So apparently in the TV show, they wanted to make the elves more sympathetic, but everyone that I read said that they're just as bad in the books. So they talk a little bit about how everything feels more vulnerable since Cahir arrived, and she's like, I'll take care of it. So I find it interesting that both of them, like both Francesca and Fringilla, have this conflict because they like each other and they want to work together, but like both of their sides are putting pressure on them to like diverge. They're not really happy about the deal that they made.
Yeah. Well, and that's a sign of a good compromise, is that nobody's happy.
Right. True. Yeah. And here is there's speech that 𝘴𝘵𝘪𝘴𝘰𝘥𝘦 gives, which frankly, I'm going to call it, I don't know if I should get political like this. I'm going to call it a feminist wet dream. Okay. Now, because he basically tells her, he's like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to ask you what you need of me. Right. And it's like, I know women are always, a lot of, women who are into this kind of stuff are like, men are always telling us what to do. And like, we just want them to support us. And like, they should just ask us how to support us. Like they shouldn't, assume that this is how they can help. They should say, what can I do? So it was like a little too, not in character. And like, it just seemed like it was
felt a little artificial.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, I've been married for a while. And if I ever made a speech like that to my husband, like, maybe when we were newly married and I was like enthralled, but like no one talks like that to their spouse. Like, like you're like, you want to be nice and you're like, okay, how can I help you? But like, it was just whatever, very dramatic and not.
And this episode has a couple of things that kind of gave me a little bit of an eye roll, but yeah, this scene was definitely one of them. I mean, it's supposed to be sweet and endearing, and they're talking about having a child and whatnot, and I get, when I look at it in the lens of, this is a couple that, they have been trying to lead their people for so long, and they've been trying to have a child, and I think it was meant to be a tender moment, and like you said, it's kind of a feminist wet dream of like, hey, I'm gonna do whatever you it's kind of like that. While I love that moment in Lord of the Rings, but it's kind of like that moment where everybody's like, you have my bow and my sword and my axe, it's just kind of meant as like kind of cheesy warmth, I guess. And so I'll accept it on its face value for that.
I guess the reason why I think it also doesn't ring true to me is because 𝘴𝘵𝘪𝘴𝘰𝘥𝑦's got to be some kind of saint, because he was the king of the elves before, and he led a failed rebellion against, Calanthe or whatever. And ever since then, and Francesca tells him this directly, she's like, you failed, and that's why I'm queen. For any person to have failed at something, and then their spouse, and I don't know which was first, and then their spouse becomes a leader because they failed, I would feel like they probably have like a lot of insecurity and resentment about that.
Yeah.
And so for 𝘴𝘵𝘪𝘴𝘰𝘥𝑦 to just be completely like, oh, Francesca, you're amazing and let me help you, he's like either perfect, it's just like,
or he's not telling her the truth.
Like how, or he's like, I don't know, deadened his feelings, or it doesn't make sense to me that the kind of person who would be a leader is just so able to, it's all like peace and rainbows now, and Francesca, you can do it for me. Like I feel like there should be some agony, some conflict, some insecurity on his side,
Yeah. And who knows, maybe we will find that out. But yeah, there was definitely a personality shift with that. It could also be that he's just, because failure for men is difficult, especially failure in something they're supposed to be an expert in, like battle, right? And so maybe, he's in this side of like, maybe he's feeling like, maybe I can't do this, right? He's feeling not emasculated. I don't want to say that because that doesn't feel like the right word, but like maybe he's feeling sorry for himself, and so he's deferring to his wife, who's kind of taken the reins, right? Will there be resentments down the road? Probably. There might be something that comes up where, he mentions, how I said I was a failure, and then maybe they get into an argument. I don't know. Or maybe he thinks like, after she has this baby, I can go back to being the ruler and the king because she's going to be focused on this baby. I don't know. But
I don't think so. He doesn't seem to show any interest.
Yeah. We'll see. But yeah, that is quite a shift.
I don't know. I think honestly, I just think they didn't write his character well. I don't think they thought about it too much.
Probably not. Everybody focuses on the Witcher, Ciri, and Yennefer.
Right.
So
Right.
these side characters.
Yeah. Anyway, writers, if you're watching this, there's a story right there waiting, you know. So
oh, goodness.
Now we have Hake, who I automatically despise, talking to Cahir because he's racist AF. And he's like, those 20s, you know, they can't do a good job. Like, I don't trust them, and like they don't fight well, and like, you know, why are they here? And Cahir tries to defend them. He's like, well, they're loyal because, you know, we gave them a land. And he's like, they're not loyal to the White Flame, they're loyal to Fringilla. And then Cahir, I think he feels like he has to do something to gain Hake's respect at that moment. Because he's been defending Fringilla. So he's like, let me do something really assholey. Let me fight with he's like, you fight like fairies. He's like, he fights with, you know, some random fairy, turns out to be Dara, and totally, you know, creams him because Dara's like a billion years younger than him and just started learning how to fight. Whatever.
Yeah. Oh no, this was definitely a penis measuring contest. It was a male ego. I am man. Watch me. Because his ego got wounded, so now he has to defend his ego.
I think it's more like he has to show that he's, because Hake is obviously like major ass jerk, right? And he, you know, is very against the elves. So, and Cahir just defended them, so that's like minus a point with Hake.
Yeah.
So now he has to restore the point with Hake, so he's back on the same equilibrium, you know?
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, I'm convinced that like so much of politics and organizations and institutions and whatever, it's just all these weird relationship dynamics of like, you have to dance that you have to do, right? It's
there's a lot of pomp and circumstance and showiness. For sure.
So I love there's a lot of great lines throughout The Witcher, and this scene has one of them. Cahir's like, you fight like fairies, and then Hendril finally gets like fed up, and he, you know, puts a knife to his throat, and he's like, impossible, your kind kindled them all. But luckily, the aggression does not continue because Francesca's having her baby.
I know. And listen, like when we go into this scene and the person who's by her Francesca's side is Fringilla. Right. So again, like her husband's obviously late to the punch, right? He gets there. But when the baby is born, so I want your take on this because I'm not sure what to think. Like part of me thinks that Fringilla used her magic to revive that baby.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I do.
Okay.
I don't think it was intentional though. I think, because you know how sometimes they talk about how chaos kind of does its own thing. And that when you have strong emotions, it can kind of do its own thing. I'm wondering if it was an unintentional use of her magic because she was hoping for the child to breathe, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, like, she claims that she did not use magic to help the baby, but I'm wondering if she unintentionally used magic to bring the baby back to life.
So I feel like if she had, the show would have like winked at us, the audience, to show us. I didn't see that, so I don't think so. And she did such a good job of like that relief on her face and that happiness. You know, it was probably the first time I was feel a smile. She was so happy. I loved it. She was like, you know, no magic, just warmth, which by the way is like obviously like a metaphor for life, how warmth / love, emotion is, you know, a powerful force. And, you know, and I love how she goes out to announce it to all the elves and they're all so happy, but she is so happy. And you know, the person who's been without connection for a very long time and without friendships and without warmth, right? You know, and now she's just finally, there's something to smile about, and it's such a nice moment for her.
Sure. And there is kind of like this theme in this episode of like the feminine divine, right? And we'll get into more of a reason why I think that later, but like notice that the people who have their heads on straight in this episode are all women. And that all the people who are kind of like getting themselves into impulsive decision making, most of them are men. So for me, I really saw an elevation of, you know, of women when they come together, they can be helpful to each other. And of course, towards the end of the episode, it falls apart a little bit, but I think there's something more to it going on, and I'll get into that. But I found it very interesting, the relationships between women in this episode.
No, it's interesting. I'll tell you what, like I have I recognize within myself, I grew up in a very patriarchal society, and I moved away from that, and I went into the Western world, which to me is like super egalitarian, right? And I obviously, that's you know, my approach is egalitarianism, like everyone's equal,
right.
And I don't notice like I try not to on purpose, probably because it upsets me. To me, it's like, oh, everything's fair, everything's wonderful, because it's such a shift from the way I grew up. It's
sure.
To me, it's like night and day. So like when I look out in the world, I'm like, I see everyone as equal. So I don't think too much about like, oh, this is men, this is women, because it bothers me. I want everyone to be equal, but I'm aware that I probably overlook things because of that. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, I'll see how it plays out. The thing that I do love about this show is that it definitely plays with power dynamics, and it doesn't, like, I'll be honest with you, Ciri in season 1 annoyed the hell out of me, but I love that she's kind of coming into her own in this, and I think a lot of female characters are kind of coming into their own, and they do have, you know, equal treatment in a lot of ways, because, you know, we've got our morally gray female character, we've got our evil female characters, we've got our hero female characters. So I like that there's that balance in there too. So you're right about that.
Right. Yeah. Like when I see Cahir and Fringilla, I don't see it like Cahir being a man and Fringilla being a woman. I just see like Cahir and Fringilla, like, you know, that stuff like that. Or when I see 𝘴𝘰𝘵, who's a very strong person, like I don't see it like, oh, strong woman. She's just a strong person. You know?
Right.
Anyway, that's my thing.
Fair enough.
But yeah. And speaking of more defensive Cahir, Cahir says something very nice now. You know, they're overlooking this pavilion. It's a really beautiful scene. And they're watching all the elves celebrate, like fireworks. It's really pretty aesthetically.
Yeah.
And Cahir says, you know, the last time I saw people being so happy was when the usurper was overthrown, which I want to get more history on that. Why? Because actually, speaking of why I also feel sympathy for Cahir, or I'm interested in or intrigued by him, I guess, is that we know that the usurper was apparently very nasty, right? And the people did not like him, and he kept Fringilla in this cage where she was basically like raped all the time. She and other mages. So obviously, I can understand why she is loyal to him. I don't know why Cahir is. I know that when he was you know, having that whole interaction with Yen, he says, you know, what was she? I found in my brain, and like we serve 𝘕𝘰𝘪𝘴 because he served us first. So I'm like, okay, what did he do for you, Cahir? Like, why are you
right? There's some backstory there.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to find that out. But anyway, so that's the last time he saw this so much happiness. And you know, Fringilla says it took her a while to feel anything, which totally makes sense. You know, she had to deaden her emotions. So now, yeah, that she's like very, very cautiously like releasing them. And Cahir praises her. He's like, you did this.
Finally.
He says something nice. But he is being practical afterwards, and he says, I wonder what this will do to our alliance. And I hope I'm wrong. So again, I do think that he's not stupid to notice that the elves are not exactly so happy about what they agree to, you know, to serve in the army. And again, so I mean, I know like people don't like the bearer of bad news, but he turns out to be 100% right.
I guess we'll have to see how it plays out. I mean, I can definitely understand from a logistics standpoint that there's still going to be tension between the humans and the elves, right? It's a historical thing that has been going on for eons. So there's no way that there isn't going to be tensions, especially when the elves are being put in a subservient sort of situation, right? We give you this city back, but you have to fight for us, right? And I think those tensions will come to a boil at some point. So I mean, he's not wrong there. And I would hope that they would give Fringilla the benefit of the doubt, and maybe that she can be the counterbalance to that. I don't know, but maybe I'm being hopeful.
Yeah, there's some discussion at the end of episode 8 that, leads into this, but whatever, it's episode 8, so we won't
Yeah,
go
I was
into
gonna
it.
say I haven't gotten that far yet.
Oh yeah, okay, fine. Never mind then. Oh my
I'm
God,
like,
where did
I did that.
when did you watch up
specifically
to? Did you just watch through 6?
I just watched through 6 and a little bit of 7. So I have not gone even. I did that because I didn't want to spoil anything, because I have a habit of doing that.
Okay, well then, we have what to discuss when you're done, because everything we've been discussing. Never mind, I didn't realize you didn't watch to the end. Okay.
Okay.
Fine. That's really
good to know, though. My hopes will be dashed.
Really a lot. I mean, it's exciting. I'm excited for your reaction. Anyway, and the last thing that we have, well, not the last thing, a couple last things. The last thing we have in Cintra is Dara, and he tells the owl, right, which is like his communication, I guess, with Renea, that Ciri is the reason that I don't know, that they're here, and that they're, they took over Cintra.
Right.
Yep. Okay. I just realized. Hold on. All right. So now let's talk about Geralt, Ciri, and Yen. That's our last storyline for this episode.
It was intense. It was very intense. But I like that it kind of started out kind of lighthearted. I love Nenneke. So when they come to the temple and they get introduced to her, oh my God, she's hilarious.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit before we let's just catch up on like the action before we get to Nenneke. Geralt and Ciri have just left Kaer Mohren, and they're having this total teenager interaction. She's like, "Where are we going?" He's like, "I don't tell you." And she's like,
I loved that.
Right? You don't care about me. You just care about keeping me alive. As long as I'm alive, it's fine. All you care about is your dad duty. You don't care about what I want.
Huff, 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 huff. And he's like, I understand. Oh
I'm
God.
getting my daughter is 10. I'm totally getting into those kind of arguments, and I'm like, I just see me and my mother fighting, and I'm like, oh, you're doing the same thing. I'm like, you have to stop, break the cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
My mother and I get along very well now, but like whatever, that's what happens
at that age. It gets kind of contemptuous. Oh God. But yes, I loved that. But I love like when they come in and they talk to Nenneke, and the part where like you could tell like she's putting on that like, oh dearie, you're so great, we've missed you so much, and then like you cut scene after they've talked with her, and they cut scene to the part where she's talking with Geralt again, and she's like, I don't see in any way that you're not fucked.
Right.
Like, oh man.
Yeah, I will say I thought there was a little too much effing all over the place. Like every character does it, but I do like, she's like seen in many ways like, a monk, right? Like the robes and the orange outfits,
sure,
people like goddess, which gives you this image of like, oh, peace and whatever, but then she's like really sharp tongues. And I actually read the only Witcher book that I just read now, The Last Wish, and then it is actually in there a lot, and she's such a funny person. She's great because she is he's maternal and loving, and she's obviously there for him all the time, but she gives him like sharp words, and she calls him out, and she tells him,
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But I love this whole interaction, and I think it's good that they're trying to find a way to balance teaching Ciri about her chaos and helping her learn how to hone her power, and I think this is a good place for her to start. Unfortunately, it doesn't end up that way, but Yennefer catching up with them, you know how you were talking about like how did the other dude know where they were, or even know where to find them? This was another situation where I was like, how did Yennefer even know where to find them?
And she didn't even like knock. She's just in the temple. I guess they let anybody in.
I guess so. And then like she's walking into these doors trying to find, I don't know what, maybe Ciri, maybe Geralt, and then she just happens to walk into the room where he's in. Like, come on.
I know. Yes, it was a little too contrived and easy.
Yeah, but it was so funny because like I wasn't actually, and I don't know if it's because of the time and distance I've had between season 1 and this season, but I did not feel the romance between Yennefer and Geralt. Like it felt like yes, oh my God, I can't believe you're alive kind of thing. That I felt was genuine, but I didn't feel the I'm consumed by you, because, and I think it's because he has this other responsibility now. He's his dad.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I don't know. I felt like, okay, so there's a lot of things that
Mhm.
I thought were, I had to honestly, I watched it again and I watched the end specifically because I was like really
Yeah.
interested in her reaction. So basically, we know that she's decided, she agreed, both Mair, I'm going to get this kid and bring her
Yeah.
to Cintra. So she presumably doesn't know, right, who this kid is. She just knows she has to get her. But then
Right.
when she comes in, right, they have this reunion, and then Ciri comes in, and it's really cute because she's like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm so sorry. I'm
I
gonna go,"
loved that
right?
moment. It was so hilarious. She's like, oh, like she just walked in on him with a prostitute or
Right.
something, like, bye.
Right. And he's like, dear friend. And she's like, oh, dear friend. Okay. Which apparently is a reference to the books because actually in the books, apparently the first interaction that we have at the end at all in this season or in the book is he writes her a letter, dear friend, and he asks her to come to Melitele to train her.
Ah, gotcha.
So that's why it's called dear friend, because then she's, upset that he called her dear friend. But I watched Yen's reaction specifically because she's like, oh, that's your kid, right? When she puts the connection that the kid she has
She's
to
the child of
betray
surprise.
is the child of surprise. But her reaction, I don't know if it was meant to be understated, but like it was barely obvious to me that she even realized. Like I was like looking the whole time, like Yen should have some conflict, right? Like Yen is not like completely uncaring. Like she cares about Geralt, right? So she should be in like turmoil to be like, oh, it's either my magic or this Geralt's child, and oh my gosh, what a conflict. What am I going to do? Like there was not that agony and that turmoil that I wanted to see.
There really
I watched it again looking for it, and I was like, okay, I guess she was just being very understated. I don't know.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder about that. Or like maybe she was just completely like, because I don't think she was expecting to see Geralt. I genuinely believe that. But I don't know where she is emotionally right now. Because because before season 1 she wanted a child more than anything, right? And then in season 2 here we see that she wants her magic back more than anything. And so I think maybe she's just blinded by that need. And that while, I think Geralt kind of breaks that spell a little bit for her because she wasn't anticipating it. She's not quite recalculated how she's going to get around this, because we see later in the episode that, she does not have the best of intentions with Ciri.
Yeah, so that's the thing. And she's sitting there so calmly, schmoozing with Geralt and like, having like a wonderful, lovely conversation with Geralt and Ciri and being very nice. And it's like, you're planning on betraying them all and you don't have any like angst or nerves. I felt like I should have been portrayed some kind of nervousness on her part or conflict on her part. But like she's totally sitting there calmly making unicorn jokes, which also is a book reference. Apparently, I don't know if you haven't like seen the bit, but apparently in the books she had a stuffed unicorn that she would like to have sex on. And she and Geralt have had sex on that stuffed unicorn. That's why she said it broke under mysterious circumstances. You would appreciate that.
Oh, it sounds like it. Goodness, sounds like I need to read that book.
Right. It's in the games too, apparently.
All right, good to know. But oh my gosh. But yeah, there's something I don't know if Yennefer has gone back to her cold, unfeeling self out of desperation. But yeah, I feel you. Like there should have been more conflict there because she cares about Geralt, so why wouldn't she care about Ciri? But I think she doesn't know Ciri.
But I mean, it's like inconsistent with her behavior this season too, because she was trying to help the elves. Like she tried to help, Germain, or I think it was the guy who went under the tentacled creature in the sewer, and then there was this elven girl who's being torn away from her mother, and she was trying to use her non-existent magic to help her. So she's shown to have sympathy this time, and like she really didn't want to, she didn't, turn to 𝘴𝘰𝘪 until the last possible minute, until she was about to be executed, really. So that was well done. But then, like, why does she's so blasé about what she's about to do?
Maybe it's because like having feelings about that would get in the way of her getting her power.
Okay, that's true.
Because Yennefer strikes me as the type who can shut down her emotions anytime she wants to. Her and Geralt had that in common, right? And I think when she has this one track mind of this is something that I want. So the The other times where she did something for the benefit of someone else, it was because she did have a strong connection to them, or she had a, like, this isn't going to get in the way of me achieving my goal kind of thing, right? But with this, like, she doesn't have that same tie with Ciri. I think, and this is just my guess, I think we might get more of that conflict and that turmoil as she develops a relationship with Ciri. I'm curious to see if that happens. Again,
Okay.
I haven't seen the rest of the season, so maybe I'm wrong.
Right.
But I'm wondering if that's what happens. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Sounds like I'm gonna be disappointed.
Well, let me know when you're done, okay?
Okay.
I guess just before we go on a little bit, let's mention we start off the episode with there's this 𝘕𝘰𝘵𝘦. They want to cross the river, but there's a 𝘕𝘰𝘵𝘦, and he uses Ciri as bait for the 𝘕𝘰𝘵𝘦 to come, and then he like jumps off the cliff, kills the 𝘕𝘰𝘵𝘦. But then Ciri says something interesting. She says, "I don't think the 𝘕𝘰𝘵𝘦 wanted to kill me."
Yeah.
So that to me is like her whole. She seems to have a connection with monsters that, I don't know if she controls the monsters or if she's a conduit or if she has some power over them or something, but like that's definitely not a throwaway line.
No, it is definitely not. And since they haven't been attacking her particularly, but the people around her, it does make you wonder. And it kind of reminded me of Game of Thrones a little bit.
Which
with yeah, well, I mean you've got your mother of dragons. So I'm wondering if this is kind of her role here, and that she has kind of like a Daenerys kind of quality to her, where like except these monsters are the things that are drawn to her. Maybe that's part of her power with the elder blood. I don't know. Yeah. There's a lot to uncover here. So I'm sure that a lot of it was going to season 3 too.
Right. 3 to 8 or whatever probably is a part of the whole thing. And another thing that happens is Roach dies. So,
I know. I was like, oh no, Roach. Which I found it was really cool that it wasn't cool that Roach died, but like it was interesting the parallel between the break-in with Faramir and the death of Roach. I'm like, oh God, this is foreshadowing. Yikes.
I don't remember what you're talking about because honestly, I read Lord of the Rings a billion times when I was younger, but I have not touched it since then. So
yeah,
sorry, I don't know what foreshadowing.
No, I think it's just interesting that break-in kind of happened at the same time as Roach dying, and I'm like, what's going on here? So I guess we'll have to see what happens. But there's definitely at the beginning of the episode.
Okay, I thought you said Faramir from Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay. All these names sound the same.
Sorry. Yeah. So I'm trying to think what else. She also tells him, it was an interesting interaction. She tells him that when the Black Knight caught her, she was scared, and so she screamed, and then the ground split. When the boys came for her, like boys, young men, whatever, came to her and wanted to assault her and give her to the Black Knight, she screamed intentionally, and she knew what would happen, or she knew something would happen. So she's kind of like processing her guilt over having killed them.
Sure.
And I mean, I know that obviously I've never killed someone, but like I imagine that, my brother went to the Marines. I don't think he killed someone either, but he doesn't tell us, right?
Right.
And I know that for anybody who, we talked about this with Munde Populand, what was it called? Moral trauma?
Moral injury, yeah.
Moral injury. Yeah, so obviously she had to kill them. They looked like they were going to rape her, honestly. And,
sure.
They were to the Black Knight, which would have resulted in, well, we don't know actually, but, I think was pretty justified, but she's still, it's hard to be a person who kills someone,
Right. And I think that's the hard part is that, it's two opposing things that are true. You have this side of you that doesn't want to do harm to anyone, and yet you have to defend yourself. And sometimes it means you have to defend yourself with deadly means. And it's trying to reconcile those two sides of yourself that are kind of battling it out. And I think really, if season 1 was about Geralt's hero's journey, this is about Ciri's hero's journey. So season 2 is about her journey, right? It's something it would be interesting to look into. One of the things that I've always been fascinated by, so Joseph Campbell, he wrote a book called, the Hero's Journey, and I love it. Absolutely love it. If you haven't read it or you haven't looked into his theories, like, so awesome, check it out. But I really do feel like, this whole season is Ciri's journey, right? And she's still kind of in that kind of like stuck in between. She's being helped by mentors and things like that, but she's still trying to find her path and find her power and finding the balance in that. And part of that is grappling with what this power is capable of doing, which is mass destruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, apparently Ciri becomes like, when I know the whole story is about Ciri and her powers, but it's nice to see, how it all started, right? She starts off with this really young, sheltered child, especially in season 1. She doesn't, has been completely guarded her whole life. She's just been a princess. Everything's been handed to her and she's been protected all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So, to see that transformation is really nice, to see how you go from A to, to Z.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of necessity. So I'm curious to see how that goes. So,
yeah, I'm trying to think, what else did we see that was interesting? Oh, yeah. One thing I like, when they come into the temple, Geralt's swords are taken away. And she's like, is that okay? And he's like, oh, we're safe here. Don't worry, there's no politics here.
Yeah, sure. That's
as soon as I saw that, I was like, something's gonna happen.
Exactly. Because it's like whenever a character states an absolute or states and I did this in Midnight Poppyland when Tora says I never lie, and I'm like, you're gonna lie to her at some point out of necessity. But I mean, even in this case, I'm like, whoa, anytime there's an absolute, you need to be wary. Right.
Yeah. And something else that I like, so Nenneke talks to Ciri. She's trying to like suss her out and get a feel for who she is.
Yeah.
One thing, Ciri is like not so talkative. So she asks her, tells her, we can help you control your chaos. And she's like, oh, what's chaos? She's like, oh, like daughter of chaos. And she's like, where did you hear that? And he's like, she just totally brushes off and, takes a drink of water and asks something else. He's not answering her.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That whole scene was actually pretty cool. I like how she's trying to kind of help her come to terms with maybe I'm thinking of a different scene, but the scene where they're in the hall and they're lighting the candles. I think that was it had its banter for sure. But I think that was maybe a step towards Ciri healing from that moment where she killed those men, and like knowing that she will probably have to kill more in the future.
Yeah, I honestly hope that Ciri finds herself back in the Temple of Melitele for an extended period of time, because I think that she would benefit from Nenneke's personality, from that atmosphere. It seems very peaceful, and then from the education that they have. Yeah.
And I mean, let's be real, like, not that, I know that, sometimes we want to, in a perfect world, look at things in an egalitarian way, but, she's basically been brought up in the last few months or so, I'm assuming, in a frat house,
right?
With a bunch of men. And like, we need that kind of balance. And that's kind of why I was talking about the feminine divine, because this is something where, she really needs to get in connection with, right? Because if the Witcher Den is all about violence and killing and even for the right reasons, maybe this can be her way to kind of find that balance of like, you have, one of the things that she says to Geralt, Nenneke says to Geralt, is, I've taught you in all things balance. Right? Yeah. And so I think that's part of what Ciri needs to learn. So I agree with you. I really hope she gets some time to spend there with Nenneke. She needs it.
Yeah, although I will say her educational methods are interesting, because she's like, oh, 𝘰𝘪, come and, show her the 𝘴𝘵𝘢𝘁.
I know.
And she doesn't tell her anything about it or what she's supposed to do with it. She's like,
figure it out.
It. And 𝘰𝘪 is adorable. He's like so anxious, and he's clearly like, has a crush on Ciri, and he's so cute.
I know, that was cute.
And he's like, she's like, oh, what do I do with this 𝘴𝘵𝘢𝘁? And he's like, oh, I don't know. It's a mage's tool, but my tool is, I don't mean to brag, but my tool is much bigger.
I know. It's like, it's almost like that we had to have that moment of levity because shit was about to go downhill, and boy did it go downhill.
Yeah, and I had to say, so Ciri, the way she treated him, she was kind of a little bit like she had the potential to be, you know how like when girls are really pretty and there's an early guy who likes them, they could be very cool, right? So she kind of started out, she was like, you know, he dropped the book and she's like, oh, your big fat tool almost broke my toe. But then and I was like, oh no, she can be a jerk. But then she, you know, she was nice to him. She's like, thank you for showing me around. So I'm like, okay, good. Because I hate catty, nasty girls. Or people.
I'm like,
you know?
oh, please don't go there.
Right.
But we have to remember she's also a teenage girl.
Right. It's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. We have to give people room for mistakes.
Yeah. And she's still going to make them. And I think, you know, because of, you know, his relative youth, it kind of reminded her of, I think in a way it kind of reminded her of her own youth, because she's had to do a lot of growing up recently. And it's just like, wait, I need to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah, I could be a little kid. Yeah. That's a good point.
So
that's interesting, right? She hasn't spent time with kids her age since
she really hasn't
left Cintra.
Yeah, she's been around adults this whole time.
I realize a big part of like my conflict with my kids is that I expect them to be like adults, right? I'm like, why don't you do your homework? Why don't you brush your teeth by yourself? Why don't you put your shoes away? Why don't you put your thing in the dishwasher, right? I'm like, yeah, but they're kids, you know?
Yeah.
So
it's a hard balance.
Right. You have to, right? She does have to grow up very fast because she's with adults.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and that last scene, I'm afraid for Ciri, not gonna lie.
Yeah, so let's talk about what happened. So basically, you know, that just, you know, Geralt and Yen have their reunion and we talked about it, and they're sitting and schmoozing and talking. And you know, Geralt tells Yen, he's like, oh, you're, you know, I met Istredd. I met another dear friend of yours, right? It's like, and he says that, you know, I heard like all about it, so you're here because you're hiding from the Brotherhood, right? And she's like, yeah, sure.
Totally.
Yeah. Totally. And Geralt is so smitten with her. Like, there's this moment where he lies back and he's just like looking at her with this like total simpy smile on his face. God, he is just like gone for her.
Oh man. And I'm, you know, honestly, I'm sitting here thinking like, why I still, and maybe I need to go back and rewatch season 1, but I don't see, all I have seen with those two is lust. I have yet to see anything that remotely represents love to me. And granted, they've been through some crap together, and that's why I'm thinking like this is more of a trauma bond than it is love, actual love. Because when Geralt is reminded of his responsibility, his attention shifts. So I when I was watching season 1, I watched it with Yoel, and he had already watched it. And I watched it for the first time while he rewatched it, and I kept being like, why is he into her? Why is he into her? She's such a nasty person. I didn't like Yen at all until the last episode of the season when she actually did something nice, you know, helped people out with Sodden. But then I thought about it. I was like, you know what? They are similar in some ways, in that Geralt has always been an outcast. He's always been hated by everyone around him. He's always had to be all alone and by himself. He had to be strong to overcome everyone's hatred. And Yen had a very similar experience. Yen also was always an outcast. Yen had to use her power. She wasn't interested in being liked. She wanted to be powerful because she didn't want to be helpless again, like she had always been growing up. I saw that similarity and why they would click together. Also, they're very intelligent, and they do their own thing. You know, they don't care what anyone else around them tells them to do or wants to do, or social convention. They do what they want to do. So I thought they were similar for that reason. But honestly, I think, like I said before, Geralt's too good for her. Geralt is a good guy. Honestly, like, I don't, oh God, I really hope they're not endgame.
They're for sure endgame. I mean, just any brief cursory thing of the internet, they're endgame.
They probably are, and it is what it is. But I just, oh God, they're gonna have to do some hard convincing for me to look beyond what they've already established.
So I will say, I've read a lot of commentary on the internet where people say that book Yen is not bitchy like this Yen. They say that Netflix Yen is like selfish, and apparently this whole thing that she does here does not happen in the books. Like, deal with Voleth Meir betraying Ciri doesn't happen in the books. In the books, Geralt calls her and she trains her, right? And that's it. Like, So this whole betrayal doesn't happen. So yeah. And then apparently she's she's strong-minded in the books, and she's got an attitude in the books, and she has a wit in the books, but she's not like selfish and emotional and traumatized like she is here,
Okay.
So
that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
See how they're
I've only read the first book, but this is what I've been reading.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to dive into the books then. I mean, as per usual, like this is why I watch the show first, and then I read the books, because over and over and over again, if I start with the books, and then I watch the show, inevitably I'm disappointed, and I'm focused on all of the things that they did wrong.
Completely agree with you, and I don't know what I'm going to do now in terms of book reading, because I did read the first book because everything happened. But like, for example, I was told, oh yeah, it's safe to read, every book corresponds to every season. So season 1 is The Last Wish, and season 2 is Blood of Elves. So like, don't worry, you won't be spoiled. But then turns out one of the stories from The Last Wish is in season 2. So I'm like, I would have been spoiled if I would have read it before. So I really don't want to be spoiled. So I don't know. I don't want to read. I'm anxious. And also I know once I start reading the books, I'm going to compare. The truth is, at this point, I think I'm able to separate them because I watched the show first. So I have like the show, and then the book is like something different. But yeah, if it had been the other way around, for sure, I would have been not happy. So
yeah. So it's interesting. So maybe my ire for Yennefer is not warranted.
No, but listen, within the show story, you have to take what you see it in front of you, right?
Sure.
If they make her character a certain way, then that's who she is in the show,
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, though, because like I'm nervous as hell for Ciri at this point. I'm like, oh God, what is she gonna do to Ciri?
Yeah. Okay. So basically, let's get into what happens, right? Ciri comes out of bed. She lights candles with Danica, and she lights one for Roach and for Mousesack, people she talks about, misses, and then she mentions her grandmother. She says, my grandmother loved me a lot, but she hated the elves. And it's a big thing for Ciri, because I think it's very, very, very important and poignant that the people that you love can also do bad things. And okay, so most of us know people who like, we love them, and they do like small bad things. Like they yell sometimes, or maybe they steal, or maybe they like, I don't know, like who knows what, get into car accidents. Ciri's grandma is like mass murderer level of bad things,
Right.
It's a big thing.
There was a quote, and I can't remember what it was. Maybe I wrote it. Hang on one sec. I wrote it down because it was just so poignant to me. And I think it was Vesemir that said it. It was the episode 4, I think, because Ciri was, questioning, like, with her grandmother hating the elves.
I think it was that he said sometimes we hate the things about ourselves that we can't change.
That we can't change. Yeah.
That we can't change about ourselves.
What it was. And I'm like, oh God, talk about hitting you right in the gut. But I mean, it's true. Like there's something about yourself that you can't stand. And so you deal with it by not dealing with it, and you avoid it, and you end up creating this hatred for it.
It's funny. There's this phrase in the Talmud. It says, "Kol ha-posel v'mumo posel." And whenever you observe somebody, with a fault, it's really your own fault, and you recognize it because you have it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's total. It's mirroring. It's absolutely mirroring, and that's the hard part. And newsflash: you go to therapy. Guess what you're going to be doing? You're going to be working on accepting the parts of yourself that you don't like. So I don't know,
changing,
right? And changing some of those things that you don't like, for sure. So I love that that's incorporated here, and I love that it's included. That quote hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. And Nennika's like response to that, she is more encouraging. Like she's like, okay, you've recognized the reality. Now what are we going to do to move past it? She tells her, no, you can. It was you can break the cycle of hate, which I think is, I don't know where they're going to go with this. I don't know whether in the books or the show, whatever. But Ciri is the key to everything, right? Like she has the power, but maybe because she's both human and elven and royal and has that power, maybe she can be the unifying factor for everybody, right? And bring everyone together.
Sure. Gosh, I hope so. That would be great. Well, hopefully the story has a happy ending, but we won't know for many seasons.
You know, I'm the type that always assumes, unless a story shows me right away it's meant to be a tragedy, I'm like, of course it'll have a happy ending. Like,
Yeah.
that's because I'm an optimist. So yeah.
Oh goodness.
But yeah, there'll be sad things along the way, I'm sure. So anyway, meanwhile, while she's lighting the candles, Yen and Geralt are having a heart-to-heart. And Yen, I can't believe this girl sometimes. She's like, you hurt me. I'm like, you're about to take his child. This is what you're talking about now? You're telling him he hurt you? Really?
Yeah.
Why is it all
She's
about
so
you?
selfish.
I know.
So selfish.
Oh my God. Also, can I be reminded, Yen, you're the one who left him on the mountain, okay? You said,
right.
You figured out that there was something to do with a wish, which he never even clarified. You don't even know. You just like jumped to conclusions, frankly. And then you're like, you dumped him, and you're like, and you said nasty things to him, and now you're like, you hurt me.
Right. I don't know. Listen, Yennefer, I don't know if you're out there, but if you mages have like y'all's form of like, I don't know, clerics or therapists or whatever, honey, get you into some therapy, because whoo, you are all over the place. You are all over the place. Like, oh God, she like, I don't know what to feel about her character half the time, because she's all over the place.
So this thing that she just did, where she took something that she did and blames him for it, it's toxic, super toxic.
Oh, sure.
She did the same thing. So remember when she goes to the artist in season 1, and she's like, make me beautiful, right? And he's like,
yeah,
okay, there's a price. And she's like, I don't care, and he's like, you won't have kids again, right? And she's like, do it, I don't care. And then so she does it, right? And then 30 years later, when she's like bored with her life and realizes that being a mage on the court was not satisfying at all, she's like, oh, they took my choice.
Like, no, you took your own choice, honey. Quit playing the victim.
Oh my gosh.
And I think that's the hard part for me with her, is that she hasn't reached the point where she has the revelations that it's not like, she doesn't see her own role in her own disasters. And don't get me wrong, a lot of people don't, but she really doesn't, right? Like, she automatically assumes the victim role. And I'm like, honey, no. Oh gosh, quit participating in your own demise and blaming it on other people.
So there's this fantastic story. I'm going to do another Talmud story. I think it was a man named Rabbi Eliezer, and he was a really bad guy his whole life, like bandit, murderer, whatever, right? Terrible guy.
Right.
And it was towards the end of his life, and he was about to die, and he calls out, and he's like, mountains hear me, and he's like, oceans hear me, and earth hear me. And basically he was trying to blame everyone for his problems, right? It's a metaphor. He's like, mountains, my society, earth is my parents, my community, my personality, my biology. Like, he's trying to blame everyone else. And then I think it was like a voice comes from heaven and says, something Rabbi Eliezer is like, none of this is you can't blame this for your problems. And he finally like puts his head on his knees, and he's like, I did it. And then he dies, but like peacefully, because he finally accepted responsibility for his behavior.
Sure.
Something like that. I have to. And then, I think, and then it's about him. It said, yesh, I think something like there's, no, after he died, when he finally accepted responsibility, a voice came out from heaven and said, there are people who work their whole lives to acquire a place in heaven, but there are people who acquire their place in heaven in a moment, and he's one of them. Basically showing how hard it is to accept responsibility for yourself, and how worthy it is to do so. I have to look up the actual story, because I want to get it right, but it's such a good point.
That's fascinating. Yeah, but it's so true. So much people, they put themselves like, and well, let me backtrack. So things happen to people, right? There's things that happen to us that we have no control over, and of course it's going to impact the things that we do and how we interact with our world, right? And it's usually because we haven't connected that the way that I'm acting is a way for me to protect myself against the world, right? This happens a lot with trauma, and I think this happens with Yennefer, sure. And I do have a lot of sympathy for her in that regard, but I need her to look at how she's participating in her chaos. And that's kind of why I love that they call the magic chaos.
Yes, perfect.
Because it's such a metaphor for, and I love that it's highly connected to emotion, because here's the thing: you can sit there and you can say, okay, I know I'm trying to protect myself because of the things that have happened to me. So I'm going to shut things out. And this, I'm going to connect to the ways that give me power, right? Because then I don't feel vulnerable. There's power in vulnerability too, because then it means that you can accept the side of yourself that is hurting, right? And people feel like they have to like build this armor around themselves, when really what they need to do is shed the armor and have boundaries, right? Yennefer has no boundaries. She just she bursts into people's lives and bursts right back out of them, and she hasn't come to a point where she's accepted herself.
That's the thing, right? She doesn't love herself, and until you don't love yourself, nothing is gonna be right. The baby's not gonna help it. Well, Geralt told her in season 1, he's like, magic can help you, the baby's not gonna help you. Like, you have to love yourself. That's it.
Yeah, and that's a long journey. That is a very long journey, and it means loving yourself essentially means like you accept both the good, the bad, and the ugly of yourself. Right. And work on it, so I can sit, like, just like we were talking about, sometimes we can be overbearing with other more timid people. Part of recognizing that in ourselves, and I say that because I do that too, is, okay, I need to practice the opposite. I need to pull back, and I need to give some room for others to have that space and to be able to speak up, and because then that allows alternative perspectives to come into our lives, and we can learn things from other people. So that I want Yennefer to do that.
And this is actually the reason why there are a lot of people who are upset with the change in Yennefer's character from the books, where but I actually, again, I don't know how much the authors of the writers, of the show are intending this, but I like to see that flawed character try to, well, we'll see if she, where she ends up, but like, where you have someone who has a lot of flaws and coming from trauma probably, and doesn't always do the right thing. I like that. I think it's so many people have experiences like that and aren't perfect people, and I think that especially if she ends up redeeming herself, it's inspiring.
Yeah, does she get that in her character arc? And I think we're seeing glimmers of that, right? So when she was helping Jaskier and helping that person out of that, God, I don't even remember, like she was trying to save them from that octopus thing, so part of me wonders, is that going to be part of her character arc, where she finds that true acceptance of herself, and then also is open to letting herself be vulnerable to another human being, truly being vulnerable, right? Because she's all about armor. She's all about that emotional armor. So it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Yeah. So in their conversation, she tells him that Jaskier is in trouble in Oxford, right? And now he knows. And she says that the fire mage is looking for you. And it's fine. So he has some information that he needs. And then Geralt tells her, he's like, your heart's been beating fast this whole time, right? Because he has Witcher senses. And he's like, why are you here? Right? So at first you're like, uh-oh, is the game up? Is she going to tell him and like redeem herself and drop her plan?
Nope.
No.
Nope. God damn it, Yennefer.
She's like, well, I have some wounds that haven't healed, which is true. But he's like, he of course assumes that it's that she hasn't had a child and that she's just here on her yet again, trying to get a child. And she's like, she lets him believe that because. Yep.
She's not there yet. Yet.
So now we have the last part of the story. Ciri is reading Ethelaine's prophecy, and then she sees there's blood on the floor and it's Yaori's book. So she follows it. She sees Yaori on the floor, and poor guy, right? And then this is a fight. Rience comes in, and the Michelet brothers come in, and there's this fight, which I know people who are into fight scenes have varied opinions on it. Like some love it.
I don't pay much attention. Like, I'll be honest with you. This was like, and the only comment I have about that fight scene is that they did the stupid cheesy Matrix crap. And I'm like,
okay, so whatever. I haven't watched Matrix in like 15 years. Is that the one with the tooth pulled out? Is that a Matrix thing?
It was the part where dude is dodging the bullet. And it just like the slow-mo stuff, like it just reminded me of that. I'm like, guys, that's like 20 years old.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
it's interesting because I've been reading or watching or listening to commentary about this episode, and
mhm.
you know, there are people who can analyze a fight scene. I'm like, I'm not one of them. I'm like,
No,
oh,
me neither.
fight scene.
Me neither. Like, hats
Yeah,
off to y'all who do. That's usually the
choreography.
part where I'm like skimming through.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Everyone focuses on different things. Like I've been
Mhm.
looking at behind the scenes. So I've seen the Instagram channels of the choreographers, you know, the people
Yeah.
who coordinate these scenes, and it's like, oh yeah, someone has to do that. Like there's
Mhm.
thought
Oh
behind
yeah,
it,
for sure.
but like I don't think about it.
Yeah, it's hard for, I'm so deep dived into the character aspects and the human aspects of it that I don't much pay attention to the action scenes. And that may be to my detriment. There may be things I'm missing, and it's entirely possible. But yeah, this whole scene again, I would love to know where this guy, how he knew that they were in the temple.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, oh well, if he was listening in, right? So in the beginning of the episode, Vesemir tells Triss that he guesses that they're going to Neneka. So
Oh, okay.
that
That
well,
would
and he
explain
tells
it.
them, he actually tells Lydia that they're going there. So I guess he overheard them.
Okay.
Although again, the timing of the medallion shivering should have been really before, but whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. We'll forgive it for now, I guess.
Yeah, whatever, it's fine. So yeah, they have this fight, and then he's like, oh, you know, Yen should take Ciri. Okay, it's so there's a little bit of like I don't know, there's
Yeah.
a machina plot, like it's a little bit too convenient. You know,
Yeah.
Yen should be fighting, right? In a normal world, Geralt would expect Yen to fight
Right.
because she has magic, but he doesn't seem to question that she just takes Ciri away. And then they just
Yeah.
randomly go into this room, which is like, if I was trying to get away from people, I would go out into the open, right? Not lock myself
Right.
into a room. It's like really unstrategic.
Yeah.
And then Ciri is like, the 𝘴𝘵𝘥𝘠 starts vibrating. So Yen's like, oh, it's magic and it's not mine. So she realizes Ciri has magic. Why Ciri doesn't question why Yen is not doing anything. Yen's supposed to be really powerful. It's like, oh.
It could just be the chaos of the moment, just because they've been blindsided and attacked, and you know, so I think that's part of it. But yeah, for sure, I don't know why Geralt hasn't really questioned at this point. Like, why didn't she use her magic when they first like came through the door? Because she hasn't told him that she doesn't have her magic at all.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and then you know, Rience is so they locked themselves in. They shoved a lot of people criticize this, and it's true. They shoved a statue in front of the door, and somehow this sufficiently blocks Rience, who's a super powerful mage, from getting in. It doesn't seem like a very heavy statue because they literally just pushed it there. And
right.
And then he's like flaming at the door, and somehow it takes, I don't know, it just seems like he should really be able to get in much faster, but whatever.
Sure.
And then Ciri, you know, manages again with 5 seconds of instructions. She just repeats some words and she opens a portal.
I know.
It's a little too easy.
Convenient, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, Ciri disappears through it, but then at that point, you know, Geralt comes rushing in or rushing by the door, and he says stop, and like Yen says, I wish I could, and she goes. So a couple of problems with this. Why doesn't Geralt rush in to like, grab Yen or try to grab Ciri, whatever? He just stands there. And then Yen's reaction was like also not that emotional. It was like, I wish I could. It was a little bit flat to me. I felt like, again, she has to express the turmoil that she hopefully feels with like, I'm kidnapping your child, you know?
Yeah, she's and maybe that's what we're meant to see. I don't know, because she just for someone to have that kind of turmoil, they'd have to not feel resolute in what they're doing, and I think Yennefer feels resolute in what she's doing. So I think maybe the heartbeat moment was supposed to tell us something. I don't know, like where he sensed her heartbeat beating rapidly, but yeah, I was like, oh God, it's all gone to shit.
Yep. And yeah, they wake up somewhere and the last thing we see is them retching, you know.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. So I will have to follow up with you when I finish the other 2 episodes.
Yeah, totally give me your reaction.
Oh man, but thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, a lot of drama, and I'm so happy we were able to have like real in-depth psychological discussion. And I know, you know, I knew that's what I was going to be able to do with you, so I'm so happy.
That's my jam. You know how I roll.
Yep. Any final things you want to say before we close off?
Um, I think just overall with this season, I think that while I really love season one, I really appreciate that this season is more linear and it has a little bit more of a flow to it because it's easier to follow. And again, like we were talked about earlier, I really like that this has become more of Ciri's hero's journey and kind of figuring out who she is and whatnot. And I'm interested to see how she handles Yennefer because Ciri is very perceptive and she knows when people have ill intentions, and so I'm wondering when she's going to pick up on that.
Well, you'll get to see some of it in the next 2 episodes. So
okay, good stuff. Thank you, ma'am.
Awesome. This was great. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. See y'all later.
All right, bye.
Thank you so much to my current patrons, Susie, Lady Libras, Lily, Jenny, Haley, Molly, Veronica, Emily, Joe, Rochelle, Saucy Tacos, Meg, Anne Rose, Priya, Alexa, Misty, Joanne, Hattie, Imelda, Esther, I'm watching you people, Tori, Papacy, Marie, Emily, Jane, Jen, Erin, Jane, Lily, Beckett, Miranda, Christine, Sadie, Kelly, Danielle, Teresa, Mrs. Castaldo, and Carrie. Your support is truly appreciated.